This is Getting Started and Beyond, Istio Multicluster with GitOps. I'm Ryota Sawada, CTO at Upsider. So let's get right into the agenda. I'll start with a brief introduction of myself and the company Upsider, and then we'll touch on the target audience, what to expect in terms of topics covered and not covered first. Then we'll briefly touch on Istio Multicluster. After going through a quick brush up on Istio resources, we'll have the first demo. And after that, we'll take up further with GitOps and go on to the second demo. And hoping to briefly touch on what can be done from there if the time allows as well. So who is Ryota? Who am I? So you can find me at usual places with Ryota Sawada RYT SWD, or the vowels taken out from my full name. I'm a CTO at Upsider, leading platform team, and also responsible for backend development. I have worked in finance space for about a decade now. I'm based in London and have two cats, as you can see in the picture to the right. You can find the picture used as my profile picture at most places. I'm rather an Istio user than a full-on contributor. So if there is anything wrong, any wrong information in the material today, please let me know so that I can correct in the materials. And this is also my first public talk ever, so fingers crossed everything goes okay. So briefly about Upsider. So I would need to briefly touch on the company I work for. It is a Series A/B startup providing B2B payment services. We use Istio extensively in production, and thus wanted to share our experience and learning with the community today. The headquarters is in Tokyo, Japan. But the remote team is around the world, and I myself am based in London, as I said before. We are hiring, but I'll stop here for now about Upsider. Please feel free to reach out to me to find out more about us. So materials today. So before we get started, the link to the slide will be provided later. And also you can find most of the materials I'll be using in the demo from the GitHub repository here. So it's a GitHub repository with my user account, RYT, SWD, and get-istio-multicluster. Today's target audience, let me start with that. If you're getting started with Istio or getting started with Istio Multicluster and would like to take it further, hopefully this is a talk for you. And this is probably not for you if you already have Istio deployed in multi-cluster scenario. And with that, what is getting started and beyond? So this is my personal take on phases following getting started. The terms used here are generic, so let me put the Istio spec and let's see how they fit in. So getting started phase is about learning what capabilities Istio provides and play with it for the first time. You install Istio with the most basic configurations, probably using IstioCTL or Istio control, however you call it, and changing some parameters here and there. Proof of concept phase is about getting real use of Istio. So you would probably set up a cluster with your business applications alongside with Istio and see how they work together. And there are some specific environmental or security requirements you would have, and you need to take in consideration at this point. And also at this stage, purposely or not, you'll face something to break or something just not to work as expected, and you would want to be able to debug, pinpoint, and fix as necessary. Production onboarding phase is about getting security right and tight, observability, make sure that ensuring observability is in place, and being able to support if anything goes wrong. Goal of today is that we'll be focusing on the first two phases only. For production onboarding, there are great talks in IstioCon, so I encourage you to check them out. For today's demos, I'll be throwing in additional requirements of multi-cluster and GitOps integration. So what's covered in the talk, I have mentioned in the previous slide, so I'll skip it for now. And also what's not covered in the talk, if you come back to the slide, you should be able to see, but this is something that we talked about in the previous slide. So when it comes to Istio installation patterns, as of today, Istio version 1.9, official documentation provides 5 guides: IstioCTL, Istio operator, Helm, multi-cluster, and virtual machine. We'll not be using IstioCTL for installation today, as that's covered in many places already. It is worth noting that the official multi-cluster setup documentation had significant updates, really nice updates with Istio version 1.8 and 1.9. I'll be touching on this more closely, but my demos will not be following the latest setup. I'm planning to update the repositories, but for this talk, please expect the steps to be not fully aligned with the official documentation. So today, I'll be using Istio operator and manifest generation approach, which is briefly mentioned within Istio CTL documentation. And if you're curious about Helm-based installation, there seems to be a talk tomorrow by Ryan Michela, I'm hoping the name is I'm pronouncing correct, titled Taming Istio Configuration with Helm, which seems to be touching on GitOps as well, so please check it out. Understanding Istio setup. So Istio tackles to solve complex problems, and for that reason, Istio may seem complicated at first. Tool like Istio CTL was to make it easier to get started, but it hides away some details which you may want to know and to understand what Istio does behind the scenes. And that's the reason why we are using Istio operator and manifest generation approach today, and we'll touch more on this in the demo. So what is multicluster? So we have been talking about multicluster for a while. Let's just make it clear what I'm talking about here when I say multicluster. It's simply to get multiple Kubernetes clusters to work together. As an example, at Upsider, we have multiple clusters, and 4 of them have Istio multicluster setup. This gives us the control and auditability we are required to comply with. And with multi-cluster setup, you need to configure each cluster, obviously, and it can be surprisingly challenging. And the configurations are often similar among clusters, but you would also want to configure specifically for one cluster for some example cases. That can lead to configuration headache and easily end up in a situation that setup works for one cluster but doesn't for the other. When it comes to multi-cluster, there are 4 categories in the official documentation: 2 for the same network, primary, remote, and 2 for different networks, primary, remote. And we will be focusing on the single network with primary today. And as mentioned, the setup is not exactly following the official documentation, as I'm using the older version of Istio. So for getting started, let's quickly touch on Istio resources: control plane, data plane, and Istio operator. Istio operator is both custom resource as well as a standalone service. The service is used for Istio installation, but is optional. We will not cover too much about Istio operator today, but we will see in action. Custom resource is used for Istio control as well, Istio CTL control as well, and we will have further look at it later. Control plane is essentially Istio-D. It used to have multiple components in the past, but when you see Istio-D, you can think of it as control plane. It monitors custom resources in the cluster, which I'll be also briefly touching on, and ensure data plane is updated accordingly. Data plane is where the traffic magic happens from Istio. So for this, I'm focusing on 2 sections here. One is standalone Istio proxy in the red box at the bottom left corner, often referred as Istio ingress or egress gateway. And another is Istio sidecar proxy in the green box. Both are based on Envoy proxy, and thus I'm using the pink hexagon logo of Envoy here. As an example, on the right-hand side, you can see a data plane with 5 pods, each containing Istio proxy. This means each proxy and thus pod knows about the routing details and traffic setup for other pods. And also, let's briefly touch on the main custom resources used for traffic management. Service entry is used for configuring some services outside of your cluster to be part of your mesh. Gateway is used to ensure Istio ingress and egress gateways can get traffic routing. Destination rule is used for traffic update, such as load balancing, connection pool handling, etc. And virtual service defines the routing. So before diving into demo, I'll be using following tools: Kind and K9s. I'm using Kubernetes version 1.17 and also Istio version 1.7.5. It is not the latest and greatest, as I had the repository set up quite some time ago, and I'll be looking to update in the coming days. Goal of the demo today, for the first demo, I'm creating 2 clusters. I'm naming blue on the left as armadillo cluster and the one on the right as bison clusters. Both have almost identical services. The first demo is basically to get some multi-cluster communication to work. So for that, I'm using HTTP bin container. And apologies, because of the time constraints, I have recorded this one so that I could do video editing magic to speed up some parts. So I promise the second demo will be a live demo. Demo time. And this one is the demo. So actually, let me get back to the slide. And before diving into the demo, let's just quickly have a grasp at Get Istio multi-cluster repository that we are talking about here. So as you saw earlier, Get Istio multi-cluster is a repository I'm based on. And down here, there is some warning I'll be working on. But this kind-based setup is the one that the video is based on. So if you want to follow along, you can have a look to see what's actually happening behind the scenes. Oops. And let me start. OK, first, I start with no cluster at all. And I get my Git repository as it contains all the configuration files, and I start creating 2 clusters. And they are given 2 different names. One is armadillo, and one is bison. Both use almost identical kind of configurations, and the only difference is the open port for them. And after a minute or so, you have 2 clusters running, and this is where the video editing magic happened. Then I create the certificates required for multi-cluster communication. And this is mentioned in the Istio offshore documentation as well. But failing to do so as early as at this stage would cause a lot of trouble later on. These certificates are registered as Kubernetes secret for this demo. And you can see that CA certs are being created under Istio system namespace with a little bit of video editing magic as well. The next step is to install Istio operator for this demo. You would usually use Istio CTL for installing Istio operator, but I'm using a generated manifest for operator. So simply using kubectl apply here. This actually gave me an error because namespace creation was happening at the same time and caused some later configuration failed to find the namespace. Simply rerunning the same command would work this time. So now you can see Istio operator being installed under Istio operator namespace. Next, I'm installing Istio control plane. I have the Istio control plane.yaml file, which is Istio operator custom resource, and I'm applying that to the cluster rather than running Istio CTL install with those files. This results in the installation of Istio D and Istio core DNS, as you can see at the bottom panes. After the control plane is installed, it's the time for data plane. I'm creating multiple Istio ingress in and egress gateways from multiple Istio operator custom resource files. You will see in total 4 gateways created, external ingress and egress gateways, and multi-cluster ingress and egress gateways. They all have name prefix of armadillo and bison respectively. At this point, I'm deploying my application as well, namely HTTP bin and toolkit. Color service is something we'll be touching on later. These get deployed to Kubernetes, and IstioD puts sidecar to them. It's a little bit difficult to see, but the bison side, so bottom right corner, you can see that the count of the replica goes up from 0 to 1 to 2 in a bit. And you can see that 2 right there. So from here, there are some imperative configuration updates. First, I need to configure Armadillo cluster so that it can resolve DNS name for bison connection. This is done via Istio core DNS. And I'm using Kubernetes core DNS to use Istio core DNS for resolution. So this is what I'm doing with the kubectl apply here. And next step is for local configuration for Armadillo cluster only. This is to ensure virtual service, etc., are set up for Armadillo services. We'll be doing the same for Bison later. And also, at this point, we are making sure multi-cluster related configurations are in place. You can find the relevant files in the repository, but essentially it contains gateway, destination rule, and envoy filter resources. As a last step for Armadillo cluster side of setup, I'm taking note of Armadillo's Istio egress gateway IP and also Bison's Istio ingress gateway IP. With kind clusters like this demo, which does not have ingress controller, it falls back to with some Docker IP. And as I get hold of those IPs, I'm updating service entry resources to hold those IPs in place. After all the updates are complete, I'm applying them with kubectl apply. So now they are applied. Finally, that's Armadillo side. And finally, I'm making sure Bison has its local routing as well as multi-cluster handling set up, just like we did for Armadillo cluster. After these lengthy configuration setups, now I can exec into toolkit container on Armadillo cluster. And let me pause the video here to curl against HTTP bin service running under Bison cluster. So you can see at the top, I'm execing into the Armadillo side of toolkit and then running curl against Bison offering. And when that runs, voila, we got the T-port from Bison HTTP bin. So let me get back to the slide. So we saw a pod in Armadillo cluster was able to talk to a pod in Bison cluster. So I got into toolkit container at the very left in this slide and tried to curl at HTTP bin address. It took quite a few steps, but was essentially getting started with the multi-cluster, just a few pods here and there. Let's check out more complex setup with GitOps. So what is GitOps? I don't want to spend too much time on explaining GitOps, but as you can see on the diagram to the right, it's about making Git the single source of truth. It gives us declarative cluster management where all changes are driven by Git repository. Although there are a few GitOps solutions out there, I'm using Argo CD from Intuit, which I'm most familiar with myself. There are several benefits of using GitOps as listed here, but the single source of truth is the most important one here. As multi-cluster requires configuration fine-tuning in multiple clusters, having GitOps helps ensuring the installation and configurations are repeatable. So as listed, I'm going to be using more tools this time. Kind and K9S are the same as before, but this time I'll be using Argo CD extensively. Also, I included some observability toolings in the setup as well. Those are not using the Istio add-ons or for simple getting started, but I used operator for installation. Those configurations are not trivial, but with GitOps, I could make those also installed alongside with my applications on Istio. So goal of this demo this time, I'm going to add more Istio configurations. Namely, I have multiple Istio ingress and egress gateway components. I'll be using 3 for each cluster. 1 for local host access, so that my demo UI can access each cluster, and 1 for multi-cluster communication, which we saw just earlier from the video, and 1 more for observability tooling, which is a mock setup where observability tools are maybe hosted under different domain or some other control. Also, we'll be using color service this time. It's an extremely simple service I created, which returns some random color. I have configured so that the service on Armadillo cluster, Armadillo blue, Armadillo cluster generates only bluish colors, and the Bison side will only create reddish colors. So let me get into the demo. First of all, if I get back to the get Istio multi-cluster. So the second demo is based on this Argo CD based setup. So I'll be making it a little bit more clear for IstioCon demo doc. I'll be making some changes, but for now, you can follow along here. And for Argo CD based setup, it starts from cloning this repository, preparing GitHub token and GitOps setup originally, and also starting clusters. But I have done up to number 4 of the steps here. So I have created the Kubernetes cluster, which does take a little bit of time. Preparing CA certificate, which I have done as well. I have also registered CA certificates to the clusters with a secret. I have installed Argo CD already. So Argo CD installation has been done for Armadillo and also Bison. And I have actually installed Istio as well. For this time, I have used manifest generation approach. So I'm not using Istio operator. So this is no operator install. I'm simply using the generated YAML files. And this is done because I just wanted to get the time of having Istio installed before the demo. And this is because it's part of the GitOps configuration. As soon as I get a GitOps setup in place, you can configure Istio from the GitOps repository, Git repository, and also update accordingly if you really need to. So now the last step is to go into GitOps setup for each cluster. So before that, let me get into running Argo CD right now. So I'm having this localhost hosted Argo CD 1.8.9, 2, and I don't have anything running at the moment. So this is Armadillo cluster, and what I'm going to do is to apply the Argo CD spec of project and application. So when I start that, and those are created, and on the back, behind the scenes, you can see that app orchestration has been created. From here, you can see that it's looking at GitHub repository that I mentioned earlier, get-istio-multicluster repository, and also looking at the path of clusters, Armadillo, Argo CD, blah. So let me get into that. So firstly, it's trying to create the namespaces, and also while I'm talking, it's creating all the applications. So it's installing Argo CD on its own. So it will be using all the GitOps management. So for any of the changes to the cluster, including Argo CD itself, Grafana, Istio traffic management, and all the applications are installed right now, or being installed right now. If I get back to the list of applications, you'll see quite a few things at the moment. So we saw just app orchestration before, and now it's synced and it's all healthy. You can see Argo CD is being synced. Grafana is being installed as well. Grafana dashboards, data sources are also configured separately. Istio multi-cluster demo are being created. Istio traffic management and all that. When it comes to Istio without operator, it's also taking time to pick up, but this is happening for Armadillo, Bison at the same time altogether. And if you look at Jaeger, Kiali, all the other tools are being installed, and Prometheus is also a part of the installation here. So I have done only creating application for Argo CD, which took all the configuration required for Istio to work with all the observability tools, as well as the installation path. So when I get back to Istio without operator, this is where I can see what's actually happening with Istio and what's included within Istio. This may be a little bit of too zoomed up, zoomed in view that you might not be able to see everything in like nice view, but you can see how many services and how many things are installed with Istio. So this time you can see with a service installation, you can see quite a few things from up above: external egress gateway, external ingress gateway, management ingress gateway, multi-cluster egress and ingress gateway, Istio core DNS, and Istio D. And from down here, it's service account, and then goes down to CRD, and further down to deployment. So in the deployment, Istio core DNS, Istio D are already running. If I can scroll to the right, already running. But from GitOps perspective, it's just trying to sync and making sure that everything is running from a GitOps perspective correctly and also synced. If I get back to all the applications and also getting to Istio traffic management, so this one is Istio traffic management local. It's cut off, but if I go into app details, I can see that it's looking at the repository, and also it's looking at the path of clusters, Armadillo, Argo CD, one repository up, so Istio, traffic management, and local. So this one has these destination rule, virtual services, and few virtual services. And if I get back to the repository, and if I just go back all the way up to the root of the repository, there is this clusters, and as we saw, clusters, Armadillo, and Istio, and then for traffic management and local. So I have 3 files, and if I look at color service, for instance, you can see that destination rule is defined, virtual services is another, and for this file, that's it. And you can see Armadillo, color service, destination rule matches up with the destination rule here. And I can actually see if there is any diff, make sure that everything is in sync. I'm having a little bit of slowness here, so I'm going to probably close that. And let me get back to the application stack. So at this point, I have traffic management setup mostly done. Let me see if the demo setup has been completed. And it's taking a little bit of time. And it has done Envoy filter, but some of the services, some of the setup has not been done completely. So if I get back, and let's just double check what is happening with Bison cluster, because we have been only using Armadillo cluster. And I have another port forward set up with Argo CD. So you would see this warning if you try to do port forward in the first place, but you can proceed with the localhost setup. And when I try to log in, if I can, loads up. Yes, thank you. I'm doing the login with admin. And you can see that this time app orchestration is looking at the cluster of Bison rather than Armadillo this time. So if you look at the application detail, you can see that it's the same repository. So I'm doing a monorepo kind of approach, but the path is different so that the configuration for this cluster is different. I'm not saying that monorepo is the best way, but this is one way to work out. So if I look at the state of the cluster right now, Istio is still being kind of progressing from Argo CD perspective, but Istio itself should be running already. So what I'm going to do is to try to query the Istio, color services running on both clusters. So if I load up the UI, this is a really simplistic UI, but basically it adds the base address and also endpoints, and then start querying every 2 to 5 seconds randomly. So if I try to query 32011, if you remember from the slide, this is Armadillo cluster. And if I try to query Armadillo cluster, it should give me all the bluish colors. And it's giving me an error. If I do that for Bison clusters, and that's going through Armadillo clusters, and that's going to give me an error as well. So what's going on? And this is not expected, so I need to solve it right now. But let's just double check what's happening with Argo CD. And if I get back to Armadillo side of setup, and if I look at the state status, Istio multicluster demo 2 is all set up. Istio without operator, this actual Istio installation is still coming up. The processes are the deployments, and they are running about an hour, so they are all healthy. So that looks to be working all okay. And I could also look at the logs if I wanted to. This is not the best log viewer, but I could get into the logs here. And it's giving me some, it's pushing routes, and it's not giving me so many errors. So hopefully that's working right now. If I get back to, not this one, sorry. If I refresh, make sure that I have 32011 and number of cells 6, Armadillo. If I query it, maybe that has been taking time to sync some of the configurations. Now this time finally worked. So this is now getting the blue kind of colors from the Armadillo cluster. And now I'm going to try to query Bison cluster. So this time, the Bison cluster has reddish colors. And because I'm pointing 32011, which is Armadillo cluster, I'm going to get the colors from Bison cluster through Armadillo cluster. So this is going through multi-cluster ingress and egress gateways. And now it's giving me all the red colors. And the same setup can be done, or has been done, with the other way around. So if I base the address from Bison to Armadillo, and I say set the number of cells to 0 to refresh, and 6. This is a quirky UI that I created. It's not great, but it does the job. And let me just refresh that. And you can see that 32012 is being hit, and also Bison is still giving me all the colors. So it's working nicely. And one last thing I would attempt to do is get back to Armadillo. And let's get the 6 things out in place. And then I put the periodic query. And lastly, because it's a GitOps setup, so I have created this pull request earlier on. So it's to add fault injection for local Armadillo cluster routing. So you can see that traffic management of local color service has been put with this 50% goes to HTTP status of 400. Let me see if I can make this work. Merge this, and then go back into Armadillo cluster. So it was a local configuration. So if you go back, if I go back into Istio traffic management local, and then I just force refreshing, you would see that it would pick up the latest change. So you can see the yellow sign here, Armadillo color service routing has been updated or is being updated. When it goes to green, it's all great. Don't have too much time, so hopefully this can do in like next 5 seconds. If not, I might have to leave it there. Let me just double check. Out of sync, it has not picked up. Okay, unfortunate, but I don't think I have the time to do that. So let me just get back to the slide, and if I have a little bit more time at the end, I might. So, am I in the right place? So after this demo, so we have seen some multi-cluster with GitOps setup in action. We use Istio custom resources in action, such as virtual services, virtual service destination rule, etc. There are many pieces I couldn't get into due to the time constraint, for instance, Envoy filter, gateway, all that. But hopefully the demo has shown some Istio setup that is relevant for your business use case. And even for getting started, multi-cluster is a great power Istio provides and is worth playing with. Again, as everything was driven by Git repository, hopefully the configuration files can be used for future references. So what's next? Because we only brush the surface of Istio offerings, I'd encourage everyone to check out more talks from IstioCon, especially ones listed here, which I found really interesting. I have enjoyed a talk from Rob Salmond about titled "What Envoy Hears When Istio Speaks." That was from yesterday. And there are many talks, many more talks that can help you go further into production onboarding journey. And also a quick note of some debugging help. Envoy and Istio proxy produces this cryptic looking logs, but they are really helpful. So if you want to understand, here are the links. And finally, before wrapping up, let me share all the links, including the links to the slide. This particular slide deck at the bottom, it's a tiny URL, .com IstioCon-2021 and GitOps. And also apologies to those who are looking for multi-cloud, multi-cluster setup demo, which I listed in the session note originally, but I couldn't make the time to get it part of the presentation today. I'm hoping to work on that as a follow-up, hopefully sometime in the near future. And with that, thank you very much.